Thank you for joining us today for 10 Minutes with the Artist, an episodic series that explores the art practice and the personal vision that guides artists. On today's episode, we're very proud to have David Walbolt, who is completing his Master's in Architecture at North Dakota State University. We invited him here today to speak about his research and the creation of artifacts in preparation of his defense. David's work examines the ritualistic way we almost sleepwalk through our everyday life. He examines patterns in our work environment to disrupt what might be forgettable, mundane, and unconstructive. David's work is at once an interactive piece that requires collaboration and creativity, and then it becomes a dynamic representation of what can exist with thoughtful intervention. I'm Anthony Ferris, and this is 10 Minutes with the Artist. Thank you so very much, David, for joining us for 10 Minutes with the Artist. So one thing that I really appreciate with the drawing with the sand is the difference between the drawing when people are interacting with it versus when it's allowed to sort of move around by itself. I was curious, are we expected to move and interact differently at work than we are when we're at home or some other place?
I don't think so. I think with the intention of the swirling sand versus the interaction with the humans is intended to do is to critique that we get into this ritual every day of going to work. And what I'm saying is it's not necessarily a broken dance, but it's a ritual that people get into every single day, and I think there's a better way we can do that. And when we cut the cords and the sand draws itself, I think that's when that could be the community of the workplace that incorporates everybody, giving a place that people want to go rather than people despise going to for 8 hours a day or 45 hours a week in some cases.
There's something really beautiful about when you cut the cord that you sort of push it and you allow it to sort of be on its own. So it takes the momentum of that push, but it also sort of exists by itself, you know? Mm-hmm. So there's this distance that sort of happens in the way that people are interacting with it. They're separated on each side of this sort of pendulum. Is distance important?
I think it is. I think what the distance helps to represent is that each person comes from, especially in a big city like Minneapolis where the Thesis site is, that each person comes from a different neighborhood, and each neighborhood is culturally different. Each person individually is different. And I think this distance represents how each person is an individual, yet they are still part of the larger community of this workplace. And I think that's what the distance is intended to represent in the artifact.
Okay. Is this site like regionally specific, the way that you're sort of addressing it, or is this something that could be replicated in any place?
The idea could be replicated in any major city, but the building design itself is very specific to Minneapolis and celebrating the culture within Minneapolis. It's very, they celebrate music a lot. Minneapolis is known for having a great arts and music community, and that's what this building really revolves around, is the music and the community of Minneapolis.
There's an element of time to your work. Part of that is this sort of feeling like it's almost like an hourglass that's sort of moving. Also, just the amount of time that it takes for the sand to empty out. Is time an important element to your artifact or to your architecture?
I think it absolutely is. I think the time in the artifact helps represent the amount of time that we spend at work because, besides sleeping 8 hours a day, work is the second greatest consumption of time in our lives. And so watching this pendulum take so long to empty really reiterates the fact that, we are at our workplace for 40, sometimes 50, 60 hours a week. And I think the longer the pendulum takes to empty, the more it emphasizes that.
Okay. I've seen people sitting and looking at this thing after they interact with it, and there's a sort of sense of spectacle to it. They just are staring at it very just very in tune with it as it sort of moves around. And I was wondering if wonder is a part of your architecture.
Yeah, I think it is. Like I said earlier, critiquing this daily dance of a ritual of that we get into every day of going to work. And there's always the wonder, there's so many people I hear go to work and they're wondering, what could I be doing? What am I doing with my life? What am I doing with my job? What else could I be doing? What should I have done? And I think it's kind of this magic moment when you see this pendulum going around, connecting this brokenness, and everybody's in this kind of state of wonder, kind of simulating what goes on in the daily work life of what else could I be doing. And I think with the architecture that I intend to design, that's where we can bring everybody together as a community in the workplace and make them want to be there, not wonder where else they could be.
There's this thing that's sort of developed, and I don't know if it's part of the industrial complex or if it's just part of efficiency, but I know how to interact on a sidewalk. I know how to interact in a church. I know how to interact in work. So one thing that you're doing is you're sort of confusing that for me, where maybe work feels like home in some way. Or I was just wondering if you can talk about that sort of evening out or harmony that you're sort of like developing between one place and the other, and why that's important.
Sure. I think, bringing everybody together from these different communities and neighborhoods as they get to work, obviously it's a different interaction than they would communicate with their family or interact at a church. What I intend to do with my architecture and through the artifact is bring people together in a manner. I'm not creating a utopian society. I'm not forcing people to interact a certain way. I'm creating a space, which I think is what architecture is intended to do, providing a space for this to happen, for these interactions to happen.
Okay. Should architecture, or maybe should your architecture, be intuitive to navigate? Or should it be something that you have to really be considerate of when you're walking down a hallway, knowing exactly where that goes or how to move around it? How much should be intuitive and how much should be sort of challenge the body and the form?
Sure. I think it absolutely should challenge the body and make you think while you're in that space. What I'm critiquing is that you get to the office and it's the same thing. It's just a different day of the week, 365 days of the year, So I think creating a space that makes people think and makes them be present in the workspace, I think that's what's really going to create that harmony in the workspace, making people really be present while they're there.
Okay. Well, at the very end of our discussion, we'd like to ask a few questions about your creative practice. So what time of the day do you feel like you're most creative?
I don't know about most creative. I get my most work done at night. I think I'm more productive. I like to do kind of my personal stuff in the morning, and that way I can set aside my evenings and nighttime to really crank away the architecture. And it's really creativity happens for me. There's these sparks here and there, but it really happens for me when I sit down and just plug away for a couple hours and thoughts start to happen.
Yeah.
And just writing them down and kind of going with it. It doesn't happen with the snap of a finger. Creativity really is a process, I think.
Yeah. Do you listen to music or the radio or anything like that when you're working?
Yeah, I enjoy listening to music, a little bit of anything and everything, but I like to mix it up with podcasts or just kind of a white noise in the background just to help me focus a little more, depending what I'm doing in my design process at the time.
What do you think then the most challenging thing is about working in the medium that you're working in?
I think the most challenging thing is going from your mind. You have all these great ideas in your mind and putting them on paper and then communicating the ideas as well as you think you have them in your mind. So it's going from thoughts to sketches to computers to physical models and having them all connect. I think is probably the toughest thing. And that's why, like I said, it takes time. It's a creative process. And you got to be able to sit down and do the work for it.
How do you know that you're finished with a piece?
You never are. In my mind, there's always something more you can do, and I think that's true in art as well. Architecture, all in this field, there's always something more you can do. But like I said, it's conveying your idea as best you can in the time you're given, and that's how the real world works. Everybody has a budget, everybody has a time, a deadline, and so it's conveying your idea as best you can by that deadline, and knowing when that deadline hits that you put in as much work as you could, and the best work that you could.
So if you had to work in a different medium than the one that you're working in right now, what would you work in?
I would switch to probably all physical models rather than going back and forth between the physical and the computer. I think the physical model is a better way for somebody to interact with your ideas rather than, images are great for an architect looking at another architecture project. Mm-hmm. Sometimes images or floor plans don't always communicate to somebody from the outside looking in who doesn't know much about architecture, whereas a model, everybody can put themselves into that model.
Yeah. And then I guess my last question would be, what's next?
What's next? This summer I'll be working in the Boundary Waters, doing construction, kind of following my passion for 3 months, and then after that, hopefully looking for a firm somewhere in Minneapolis.
Okay. Well, best of luck to you, and I'd like to thank you for coming today, and I'd like to thank you for your time and your interest in the professional practice and the creative explorations happening here at North Dakota State University. Thank you, and for everyone here at the Memorial Union Gallery, keep creative.